The Disney villains are some of the most notorious bad guys in all of cinema, embodying every single evil aspect that you would expect from an antagonist. Think of any synonym with the word evil, like mean, cruel, wicked, horrible, nasty. Many of these are the personification of all of that. But while there is so much that we already know about them, there is one question that has yet to be answered that could truly define who they really are. Which of the Disney villains are most likely to say f***? And that is what I have here today. I got an entire tier list prepared featuring all the mainline Disney villains to go and rank them by how more or less likely that they would go and drop the F-bomb. Now, before I continue, I just want to go and give a special shout out to my friend Ryan Walterson, who did help me create this tier list, and not only literally making the tier list itself that you see here, but also to go and help me compiling the list and trying to figure out which Disney villains to go and include, because there are a few of these that I personally feel like they are kind of debatable, but then again, some could argue that they are technically part of the mainline Disney villains, so might as well also have them here. And considering that we do have a grand total of 56 of them to go and analyze and rank individually, I'm sure this is going to turn out to be a fun and very fascinating episode, as we will go and learn more about who these individual villains are, learning about more of their personalities, and especially trying to figure out if they would actually drop the F-bomb or if they could not. Now, before I continue, there are some clarifications that I would like to make in regards to this tier list and which villains I'm going to be analyzing here. As I've stated before, I'm only going to be looking into the mainline Disney villains, specifically the main antagonists and maybe some of the secondary antagonists that have appeared in Disney animated features, or specifically the ones who have appeared in the Walt Disney Animation Studios movies. I'm not going to be looking into any of the villains from the shorts. I'm not going to be looking into any of the villains from a series or a special, whether they be from television or Disney Plus. I'm not going to be looking into any of the villains from Pixar. I'm not going to be looking into any of the other animated movies that Disney has distributed. I'm not going to be looking into any of the villains from the direct-to-home media sequels, follow-ups, or spin-offs or anything like that. And I'm not going to be looking into any of the not villains per se, but any of like the minions or the henchmen. Like, I'm not going to be including those like Horace and Jasper or Iago or LeFou or Kronk or any of those characters. It's just going to be focusing exclusively, again, on the mainline Disney villains who have appeared in the Disney animated features from Walt Disney Animation Studios. So hopefully that will be all clear, and we'll still have a lot of fun checking out this tier list over here. Oh, and one more thing to go and add. I just want to go and say that I'm going to be looking at all the villains from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs all the way up to Moana 2. As I am recording this, Zootopia 2 has yet to be released, and I'm still pretty far away from Hex coming out. So in that case, I'm just going to be looking at all the main villains, again, from Snow White to Moana 2. So with all that said, let's find out which villain is most or least likely to say the F word, and we are going to start off with the one that came from the one that started it all, the evil queen from Snow White. And her biggest goal is to be the fairest of them all. She wants to be considered the most beautiful person in all the land. So in that regards, I think it is a little less likely to think that she would actually go and swear. Now, I know that with her personality that she has, she seems like the kind of person whom maybe she could go and swear or maybe even drop an F-bomb or two, especially if she would go around wearing disguises like when she would go and hide herself as the peddler. But in that regards, I don't really think so, because like even when she is in disguise, she would have to go and pretend to be kind to others, kind of like when she would have to pretend to be kind to Snow White in order to trick her to bite the apple. But the point that I'm making here is that if she would go and swear, or if she would go and drop the F-bomb, then she would end up losing fair points. And that is something that she does not want whatsoever, considering her obsession is to be the fairest of them all. So if language is a restriction that would keep her away from her goal, then I think she would absolutely refuse to go and say it. So already I think with the Evil Queen, she will be the first to go and be right over here where she has not said F before and refuses to say it, because I think it's more important for her to be the fairest of them all instead of being someone who would go and drop the F-bomb.
Oh, he perished in the land.
Now, for our next one, we're going to be looking into the villains of Pinocchio, and we have not one, not two, but 4 different villains, more than any other Disney animated movie so far, in which we have Stromboli, Honest John, the Coachman, and Monstro. And when it comes to their foul mouth, they would have one to varying degrees, in which some are definitely more likely to go and say it than not. And one that I'm just going to go and get this out of the way first is going to be Monstro, mainly because Monstro, among the 4, he's the one who cannot talk. So it is far less likely that he would go and actually say the F word. If he could talk, I will give it to him that, yeah, he absolutely would, considering that his personality is just being a really angry whale. So you can imagine that if he has the ability to speak, then yeah, I think like he would immediately be on top of the list and just say the F word all the time. But in this case here, no. He just cannot, because he's just a really angry whale, so I'll just immediately go and put him here. And then you have Stromboli, and honestly, I would actually go and put him on the same page as Monstro, where he cannot go say the F word. And it's for a completely different reason, because it is technically true that out of all the villains in Pinocchio, he would absolutely go and swear off a storm. In fact, there's probably one part where we actually do see him on screen just swearing like crazy. But the catch, however, is that you could tell that with Stromboli, English is not necessarily his first language, considering that, well, in Honest John's words, he is considered a gypsy. And I know that's not necessarily a nice term to go and describe others, but he is someone whom you could tell his native tongue is not necessarily English. And when he does swear, or when he does lose his temper, that's when he would go back into his mother tongue. And if he is in the mood to go and actually swear, he wouldn't go and swear in English. So it's far less likely for him to actually say the F word, and instead he would just say the F word in his mother tongue. So in that regards, that's why I'm going to put Stromboli next to Monstro. Actually, I'll just put him over here where he legally cannot say it, because if he would swear, again, it would not be in English. But then you have the Coachman and Honest John. And those two, I feel like their personalities are very similar, or their role in the film are very similar, where in a way they are both con artists, where they would go and lure their victims to put them in a particularly bad situation for the sake of profit. Rather it be with Honest John and Gideon, where he would try to go and scam Pinocchio into going into a place like either Pleasure Island or to go with Stromboli, or you also got the coachman who would trick the bad boys to go to Pleasure Island and to be turned into donkeys. So when it comes to getting into the act of trying to trick their victims to either become donkeys or to send them to another place for profit, they would have to go and like act up, being friendly, being kind and stuff like that. And in that regards, they would be far less likely to do so. But once the mask is off, once the act is all over and that they can feel comfortable being their nasty selves, then yeah, they would absolutely go and regularly swear. So that's why, honestly, with both Honest John and the Coachman, I wouldn't go and immediately put them in the top rank of regularly saying F. But I will put them one step below. So I'll put Honest John and Gideon and the Coachman right over here, saying that they have sworn off saying F, but said it at some point. The only thing that's holding them back from being at the top of the list is just that they cannot really go and swear when they're in the act of playing their con game. It's just they have to like hold themselves back before they can go and unleash it when they can be their true selves. All right, the next one that we have here is Chernabog from Fantasia. And yes, he does technically count, considering that he is prominently featured amongst the other Disney villains. So yeah, he would have to be included on this list. And the thing with Chernabog, though, is that it is very rare that you would ever hear him talk. But if we are just going to go and exclusively look at Fantasia only, then yeah, he cannot talk whatsoever. And it's not necessarily his fault. It's not really his choice that he cannot go and speak. It's mainly because it's Fantasia. You don't really hear any other characters talking other than Deems Taylor as the Master of Ceremonies, and that one scene with Mickey Mouse and Strakowski when they were shaking hands. And literally, that's it. Because the point of Fantasia is to mix classic Disney animation with classical music. So in that regards, there's just no room for a character like Chernabog to actually go and speak, let alone to actually go and swear. So in that regards, Chernabog would have to go right over here at the bottom, where he legally cannot say F. Not because he doesn't want to, but because, well, it's just the movie that he's in prevents him to do so. All right, now we're going to go and actually skip several movies here, considering that some of these films in the 1940s, especially the package films, don't actually have an official villain in their respective movies. Like, I know some could argue that maybe the ringmaster from Dumbo or Man from Bambi would be considered a villain, but I'd argue not necessarily. I don't think they would count as official villains, considering that the ringmaster, well, he's mostly there to do his job. Like, he's not really like a villain where he has evil intentions with the animals in the circus. He's just a ringmaster. He's just hosting the circus. He's only doing his job. So he doesn't really count as a legitimate villain, despite, like, and I know, yeah, some people could say, well, the way he would treat the animals, but then again, that's how animals were just generally treated in circuses back in the 1940s. If he's a villain, then all ringmasters and circus people people in the 1940s are villains. But that's like a whole different subject altogether. And then you also got Man in Bambi. And the thing is that Man is more like an entity. He's more like a force, more so than an actual villain per se. It's just all part of nature, and the role that man plays in there is not necessarily helpful to nature. So in that regards, I don't know if I could really put man in this, considering that we don't have an entity or an actual person be the representation of that. So I'm gonna have to go and skip it. So yes, we are gonna go and skip way ahead to Fun and Fancy Free, where we actually have two villains here, considering that there are two stories in that movie. So we're gonna go and talk about Lumpjaw and Willie the Giant. And I'll just go and say that these are pretty basic villains. Like, first off, with Lumpjaw, he's more like the typical Bluto-style brute villain. And even in that story, you don't really hear the characters talk much other than the narrator telling us the whole story. So in that regards, I would consider Lumpjaw to be a mute villain. Like, if he could talk, maybe he would, but honestly, with how he is presented in the film, I wouldn't say he actually would go and say so. So I'm just going to go and put him in the bottom where he legally cannot say F. And then you have Willie the Giant, in which, yes, he is the main antagonist of the Mickey and the Beanstalk story, considering that he is the big giant who goes fee-fi-fo-fum, and that Mickey, Goofy, and Donald have to go and rescue the harp from. But with Willie the Giant, it's honestly hard to imagine him as an actual villain. He's a little bit more of a goofball. I kind of consider him more like a bad guy, more so than a villain, because yeah, his actions with what he has done, like, it does screw over the people that are underneath the clouds, but it's hard to really see him as like a villain, like a true bad guy where his intentions are to go and hurt others per se. Like, when you look at him, he doesn't seem smart enough to be a full-on bad guy, or he doesn't seem like someone who would be smart enough to actually comprehend what those swear words would go and mean, let alone actually go and actually use it. And even if you haven't seen Fun and Fancy Free, you probably are familiar with Willie the Giant's personality, especially if you have seen him in either Mickey's Christmas Carol or in Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. And the way he is presented in those cartoons, yeah, it's pretty much the same way that he is shown in Mickey and the Beanstalk. So in that regards, it's hard to really imagine if he would go and actually say the F word or actually use it in a more efficient way. Honestly, I just feel like Willie is just one of those characters that I just cannot see him say the F word because it would be out of character for him. So that's why, honestly, I'm going to put him in the bottom of the list. Like, I know I'm piling them up with the classic villains, but yeah, I don't think he can say F, mainly because he's not the kind of character who would go and actually say it. He doesn't have that nasty enough of a personality to go and drop an F-bomb.
You sure you don't want a pink bunny?
All right, so moving forward to the next villains we have here, we're going to be looking into, once again, two more villains that come from one package film. In this case is The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. So we're going to go and talk about Mr. Winky in the Wind in the Willows story and the Headless Horseman in the Sleeping Hollow story. And when it comes to Mr. Winky, I feel like he's kind of hard to go and figure out if he would, mainly because he doesn't really show up all that much in the actual story itself. or at least in the Disney version of the story. Like, he only shows up in the court scene and then into the climax where he would go and chase around the characters trying to get the deed. So in that regards, the way that they would present Mr. Winky is that he's very two-faced, where he has a nice caring personality when he runs the bar, but then there's also the evil side of him where he is the leader of the Weasels. So if we're gonna go into that concept, or if we go by from that idea alone, I think Mr. Winky would be the kind that he would probably say it at some point. Like, he wouldn't go and swear up a storm when he's running the bar because he wants to be nice to his patrons. But at the same time, when he's on his other side, when he's just with his Weasel gang, then at that point, he'll probably be a bit more nasty. And that's when he would go and be more likely to say the F word.
Oh, yes, sir. That I do, sir.
And then you have the Headless Horseman, whom it's hard to really imagine if he would go and say the F word, mainly because it's hard to really imagine if he would say anything else than to let out that freaky cackle. Even though it's hard to really imagine, again, if, like, how he would go and let that out in the first place. Like, it's not like he has a mouth to let it out. I guess, like, you know, he has, like, that hole where his neck would be, where he would go and unleash his laugh. But the point is, I think it's highly unlikely that we would hear the Headless Horseman say anything, let alone to actually go and swear. So he is, once again, another character that has to be at the bottom of the list here, where he legally cannot say F because the only thing he can say is his evil laughter. So once the 1940s are over, Disney was able to put themselves back on their feet and make full-length animated features once again, thanks to the massive success of Cinderella. And speaking of Cinderella, let's go ahead and talk about the villain of that film, Lady Tremaine. Now, I know that when it comes to Lady Tremaine and the Ugly Stepsisters, you'll probably hear a lot of swearing in that household. But the interesting thing about it is that the only ones who would go and really swear is the Ugly Stepsisters. When it comes to Lady Tremaine, however, she knows that she is in full control. She knows that she is able to do whatever she wants to Cinderella, and that she would put the Ugly Stepsisters in a higher priority, considering that they are her daughters. So at that point, she knows how nasty, ruthless, and ravenous that the Ugly Stepsisters can be. So in terms of that kind of attitude, she lets them have all of that. And for herself, she doesn't have to go and do so because she knows that she has this menacing presence and that she knows that Cinderella would not be able to go and fight back. So the thing is that she doesn't have to. And if Cinderella disobeys, then she knows that she could go and unleash the wrath of the stepsisters to go after her. So at that point, I think with Lady Tremaine, she wouldn't be the kind to do so because she has no need to do so. Mainly because with her authority and with her menacing presence alone, like, that is enough to go and unleash, like, that villainous vibe. Like, she doesn't have to go and present that with swearing or anything like that. So honestly, I think Lady Tremaine fits very well with the evil queen from Snow White, where she hasn't said it and she refuses to say it, mainly because she doesn't have to say it, mainly because she would go and let the Ugly Stepsisters do it for her.
Mother, Do you realize what you just said?
Of course. I said if.
However, I cannot say the same with our next villain here, which is the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland. Now, before I continue with the Queen of Hearts, I just want to say that, yes, I know that there are several characters in the movie that some could argue are Disney villains. And sometimes Disney themselves would go and acknowledge that maybe characters like the Cheshire Cat and the Mad Hatter and the March Hare, they can also technically be considered villains, considering that the way they would treat Alice is kind of villainous, where they would keep messing with her. However, if there is only one prominent villain, it would have to be the Queen of Hearts, because well, I feel like with the Cheshire Cat and the Mad Hatter and the March Hare, they're kind of like debatable if they really are villains. But with the Queen of Hearts, however, there is no denying, there is no arguing. And even Disney does acknowledge that the main villain of them all in this movie is the Queen of Hearts. And she is one of the Disney villains who is absolutely most likely to go and drop the F-bomb, considering that she is a constant short fuse. And whenever she would speak, she would absolutely explode with rage. So yes, it is easy to consider that she would go and drop the F-bomb no matter what. Like, she would go and say the F word as much as she would demand to go and decapitate anybody who would go and upset her. In fact, I would even go and say that if she cannot say off with their heads, she would go and say the F word instead. So at long last, finally, we do have someone who's going to be at the top of the list. And for sure, it's the Queen of Hearts. She definitely deserves to be a top tier F word swearer amongst all the Disney villains.
Someone's head will roll for this.
And then the next one we have here is Captain Hook from Peter Pan. And honestly, I would say that yes, he is another villain who would be a short fuse as well. But I would say though that he wouldn't do it as much as the Queen of Hearts. Yes, like I said, he could be a bit of a short fuse himself, and that there are times where he would really let out some strong emotions, like similar to the Queen of Hearts, he would explode in rage whenever things don't really go his way, or that he would keep having Peter Pan mess with him, or he would let out some massive fear, especially when TikTok the crocodile is nearby, or he would hear the ticking of that clock. But with Captain Hook, however, especially with the fact that he is a pirate, it is still pretty common that he would go and say it. It's just that he could keep his cool more than the Queen of Hearts, but honestly, that's not really saying much. So that's why I would say, yeah, he would be below the Queen of Hearts, but he would still regularly say F for sure.
Good form, Mr. Smee.
Good form. Did Pan show good form when he did this to me?
And then the next one we have here is C&M from Lady and the Tramp. And this is actually one of the villains that I kind of debated to actually go and include on this list, mainly because technically there is no true antagonist in Lady and the Tramp, unless you would probably go and count that evil rat at the climax of the feature. But when Disney would go and promote the Disney villains, and if they need a representative of Lady and the Tramp, they usually go with C&M. And with C&M, they're basically just regular cats, but they're also massive dicks as cats, where they just appear in one scene. They would go and mess up up the entire house, and worst of all, they do so in a very racist way. So at that point, it's hard to really go and determine if they would go and be the kind of personalities that would regularly swear, but honestly, it's hard to tell because like they just show up in that one scene and that's pretty much it. Because afterwards, once they have successfully messed with Lady, that they have trolled her, that's it. They're pretty much out of the picture. They have succeeded in their operation. But from that little moment that we have seen them, I don't know if they actually would. I don't know if they do have that personality, if they would go and actually say it. So I feel like with C&M, it's going to be hard to really determine. At best, it would be like if it would get their victim, or in this case, if it would get Lady in massive trouble, if they would go and keep screaming the F word, then maybe, but I don't think so. I don't know. Honestly, it's like kind of, I'll just put them like in the middle. That's probably the safe spot where if there's a character that I don't 100% know if they absolutely would or not, then honestly, I'll just put them here where they haven't said F before, but maybe they would do so. So I'm just going to go and say, spoiler alert, there might be a few characters that are going to be similar, but in the case of C&M, it's hard to really determine. So I'm just going to say maybe not. But hey, if you're a major fan of Lady and the Tramp, I'll leave that up to you to figure out if they would go and do so. But don't worry, I do have a clear answer with our next one here, considering that we're about to get into the mistress of all evil, Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty. And when it comes to Maleficent, I feel like she is that classic style medieval villain. She is the kind of villain whom doesn't necessarily go and swear, or if she would go and actually swear, it would be some of the tamer ones, or the kind that you would expect from classic villains like, "You fools are imbeciles!" Like, she would be the kind who would go and insult the people who would upset her and call them names, more so than just straightforward swear, especially when with Maleficent, generally her presence and her personality is a lot more calm. Like, she'll have a few moments where she'll unleash some anger, but for the most part, she could be pretty tame. She could be pretty cool, where she can collect herself very well in order to go and present her evilness. It's very similar to Lady Tremaine, where she doesn't feel like she has to go and swear because she has a lot of other traits that does present her evilness. She doesn't need to go and swear. And worst case, maybe she'll go and actually let her minions do all the swearing, considering that they can have like little nastier attitudes than her. So in that regards, I can understand if there are some people who would say that maybe she would be in the middle as well. But honestly, I would, or you know what? I feel like I was very close to, like, I was prepared to actually put her right over here where she would refuse to say it. But then again, if you would go and think if she would actually be able to go and swear, maybe she would, especially when her minions would go and screw up, especially not understanding her plans very well. Maybe she could be in the middle. Like, I could see if she can, if desired, but honestly, like, actually reading, like, has not said F before, but can so if desired. In that case, honestly, maybe that does fit Maleficent pretty well, because I'm sure she is in some situations where she would want to go and say the F word, but she wouldn't actually go and say it.
Not what? Oh, dear, what an awkward situation.
All right, so the next one we have here is another iconic Disney villain. It's Cruella de Vil. And I feel like with Cruella, she is similar to the Queen of Hearts, where she is the most likely out of all the Disney villains to go and drop the F-bomb and naturally swear, but I will say it's for a little bit of different reasons than the Queen of Hearts. Because yes, there are times when Cruella would actually be calm and collective. She doesn't necessarily explode with rage as much as the Queen of Hearts, but with the kind of personality that she has, I feel like she would go and naturally swear regardless of what mood she is. She could feel happy, she could feel like things are really going in her way, or she could just be bombastically angry with either the Dalmatians or with Horace and Jasper, and she would just be swearing up a storm. Regardless of whatever situation would be, Cruella is the kind of person where she kind of has a quota to go and meet when it comes to swear words, where she cannot go through an entire day without saying at least 10 swear words, especially if one of them has to be the F word. So yeah, with Cruella, she would definitely be right on top of the list. No question about that.
Do you understand?
Now, the next one we have here is Mad Madam Mim from The Sword in the Stone. And when it comes to Mad Madam Mim, I feel like she is the complete opposite of the evil queen from Snow White, where the evil queen really wants to be the fairest of them all. So she probably has her own self-restrictions, including not swearing whatsoever in order to look more like the fairest of them all. Mad Madam Mim, however, she really goes out of her way to be the ugliest of them all. She fully embraces being nasty, being mean, being cruel, being full on ugly. And if swearing would make her personality uglier, then she would be more than happy to do so. In fact, she would be the kind of person where swearing, especially dropping the F-bomb, would absolutely bring her joy. She would be more than happy to go and swear. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that The Sword in the Stone is a family film, then she would be more than happy to come in and just like swear just to go and offend parents and to go and offend children. So at that point, I feel like with Mad Madam Mim, absolutely, she would be like absolutely top tier in terms of dropping the F-bomb and just swearing all around in terms of the villains. I think Madam Mim would be the one who would enjoy the most to regularly say the F word.
I'm an ugly old creep.
Okay, so the next villains that we have here, we got two of them, which are from the Jungle Book, in which we have Shere Khan and Kaa. Now, originally I was thinking, why not just go with Shere Khan? But technically, Kaa can be considered a Disney villain in himself, and he's not necessarily a minion or a henchman to Shere Khan. So in that case, he can also be on this list as well. And I might as well go and start off with Kaa. And honestly, actually comparing the two, I feel like Kaa would probably be the most likely to go and swear compared to Shere Khan, where Kaa would have his misfortunes, where things may not necessarily go his way. So at that point, he can have those opportunities where he would go and swear. It's just that maybe with his Sterling Holloway-like personality, he may not be the kind who would go and say it, but it's honestly not impossible to imagine if he would go and actually say the F word or if he would go and swear, especially when things don't necessarily go his way when trying to get Mowgli in his coils. So from there, I think I'm going to put Kaa in the middle, where he hasn't said it before, but can so if desired.
This is going to slow down my slithering.
And then you have Shere Khan, whom, like I said, is less likely to go and swear or say the F word compared to Ka, because I feel like he's one of those villains where he doesn't need to go and say it because he knows that he has what it takes to be a very menacing villain. He knows that out of all the animals in the jungle, he is the apex predator. He knows that he has this reputation where he is feared amongst all the animals in there, and that whenever he is present, then that's when the animals have to be like on the lookout, and that they got to make sure that they don't become the prey. Like, the only one who would really go and challenge him is Mowgli, and that's mainly because he knows he has this personal fear that he doesn't fully show, but he does have this fear of man, especially with fire. So that's why he does consider Mowgli to be a threat, and that he has to go and take out the competition. But when it comes to Shere Khan, again, he doesn't show any indications why he would have to go and actually swear. And even if he does have a fear of man, Mowgli is still just a boy. That still makes him pretty vulnerable to his attacks. So he knows that he has the advantage no matter what. So in that regards, I think it's a pretty similar argument to the Evil Queen and Lady Tremaine, where he doesn't have to go and swear because he has so many other traits that compensates to present his evilness and his nastiness. So I think honestly he'll go right over here where he hasn't said it before and he refused to say it because he's an apex predator. Why would he need to go and say the F word?
No, I can't be bothered with that. I have no time for that sort of nonsense.
All right, now the next one we have over here, we have whom some people could go and debatably say is the absolute worst Disney villain out there, Edgar from the Aristocats. And honestly, when checking out the Aristocats, this is not a criticism on the movie itself, by the way. It is a very enjoyable film, and I do understand why people out there absolutely love the feature. But when it comes to Edgar, the dude absolutely sucks. But this is not talking about why Edgar is so bad as a villain. I'll probably save that for the Aristocats review. But when it comes to Edgar and his likelihood if he would go and actually drop the F-bomb, I feel like it's not really as likely, because some could say he seems like the character that would be Two-Face, where when he is the butler, he would go and present the typical butler personality, where he would be the happy servant to go and help out whenever he is called or whenever he's needed. But then there is that other side where he can be quite greedy, where he can do some pretty bad things in order to make things go his way or in order to get some money in this case. But when he lets out his evil side, he just presents himself as this bumbling fool. He's kind of like the closest thing we got to Mr. Bean actually being a villain, because even when he tries to go and commit his evil acts, he would often screw up, or he would just be very lucky that things even went his way in the first place. And even when he is like in that particular side, there is still that butler side of him where he's kind of like born and raised to be a butler, and that there are some etiquettes and mannerisms that he would carry over from his butler side where he wouldn't really go and actually say it. So honestly, when it comes to Edgar, I just don't think he really has it in him. Like, even though, like, yeah, he wants to be evil, he wants to be as evil as the other Disney villains, he doesn't have what it takes to actually be presented as a true villain. He doesn't have that menacing or intimidating attitude. Honestly, he pretty much goes right over here where he hasn't said it, and honestly, I don't think he would say it because that's just not part of his true personality. Even when he tries to be a villain, he just doesn't have it in him to go and say not just the F word, but just any swear words in general.
It's not fair.
All right, now the next one we have here is Robin Hood, and we actually got two villains this time, where we got Prince John and the Sheriff of Nottingham. And this was honestly another one that I kind of debated, mainly because we do have Prince John, who is the main antagonist, and some could argue that the Sheriff of Nottingham is a henchman to Prince John. But then again, there is also the argument that with the Sheriff of Nottingham, he can be a straight up villain in himself who does happily oblige to the orders of Prince John, or that he embraces his own authoritarian figure, that he can be on top of the people of Nottingham in the first place. So that's why there are some people who would go and say that the sheriff is more like a secondary villain than an actual henchman to Prince John. But anyways, going back into the argument about if they would go and say the F word, I think with these two villains, actually, they would definitely be likely to go and say it. Now, I will say, though, that when it comes to the Sheriff of Nottingham, maybe he wouldn't do so as much. I mean, this is one of those villains that he would go and embrace his evilness, and that he would be more than happy to screw over the people of Nottingham and collecting their taxes. And in that regards, yeah, there is like this wicked side that he really enjoys, but it's not the kind that is like Mad Madam Mim, where it's all about embracing the nastiness. So I wouldn't say he would go and swear as much as those who would regularly say it, but he'd definitely be the kind who would go and actually say the F word. So honestly, I would put him right over here, where he wouldn't go and say it as much as the Queen of Hearts or Cruella de Vil, but he definitely would go and drop the F-bomb at some point.
What in tarnation you trying to do, you bird brain?
And then you have Prince John, who is the ill-tempered authoritarian ruler. But he's not similar to the Queen of Hearts, because things don't always go his way. And whenever that happens, that's when he throws a massive temper tantrum. Rather it be out of anger, or he would be on the floor just crying, then at that point, yeah, he would definitely go and swear like crazy. But it's mainly because he doesn't have the maturity to go and collect himself. Like many authoritarian figures, especially the ones from nowadays, like the American Republican politicians, he would be the kind where if things aren't necessarily going well, or if things don't go exactly his way, then that's when he would go and completely lose it and would definitely drop some F-bombs, or he would be in a position where he cannot control himself, and that's when he would go and he would let out some swear words, including the F word. And considering that we are talking about the phony King of England, I'm sure that probably has happened quite a few times. So in that regards, I'm gonna go and put Prince John right on top, where he would regularly go and say it. Especially when in comparison to the Sheriff of Nottingham, I feel like Prince John would go and actually say the F word much more regularly than the Sheriff. Now, the next one that we have over here is going to be Madame Medusa from The Rescuers. And here's a fun little trivia about The Rescuers. Originally, Cruella de Vil was supposed to be the villain of that feature, that they wanted to have The Rescuers be this spiritual successor or kind of this spin-off to 101 Dalmatians, where even though most of the characters of that film would not come back, like Pongo, Perdita, Roger, Anita, and all those characters, Cruella de Vil would go and return to be the antagonist again. But then Disney decided to go and drop that idea and create a new character instead with Madame Medusa. And the reason why I bring this up is mainly because Madame Medusa is very similar to Cruella de Vil. They both share very similar personality traits, and they both share a very similar temper where they could definitely be out of control, where when they're mad, they could be absolutely bombastic. So in that regards, I think with Madame Medusa, she would be in the same spot as Cruella de Vil, where she would be right over here, where she would regularly say the F word. And even when she's not in an angry mood, whenever she's not like bombastically angry, she would still have that personality who would go and regularly swear, especially when she is purely driven by her desire to go and get the devil's eye. So yeah, for the most part, she just cannot control herself, and she would just be the kind that, of course, she would regularly say the F word. Now, the next one we're going to be looking into is going to be Amos Slade from The Fox and the Hound. And honestly, I kind of debated if Amos Slade would actually be considered the villain. I always thought that maybe the main villain of that movie would be the bear in the climax. But then again, I have seen some arguments where people would say that he is the antagonist, considering that he is the main reason, or probably the biggest obstacle, of Todd and Copper's friendship. And he is the reason why they had to be separated for a good chunk of their lives, especially when he wants to go and train Copper to go and be against foxes like Todd. So in that case, yeah, I guess I do get it. I understand the argument of why Amos Slade would be considered the villain in this case. So yeah, I guess he does count to be on this list. So in that case, if we are going to include him on this list, then oh yeah, absolutely. He would definitely be one of the top villains who would regularly drop the F-bomb, considering that he is the absolute personification of the bitter rural old man, basically the kind of person who is completely separate from regular civilization, or completely separate from suburbia and city life and all that kind of stuff. And this is the kind of guy who is just constantly angry at anything and everything, and really all he cares about is just his regular hunting life, and that's it. So of course he doesn't really care about anyone else. Maybe he would show a little bit of heart to his dogs that he is training, but other than that though, he is just a very bitter hunter through and through. So at that point, yeah, especially when he does have a short temper, then of course he would be the kind to go and regularly swear. So he would also be at the top of the list as well. All right, so the next one that we have here is one that I always consider to be a very underrated Disney villain, the Horn King from The Black Cauldron. And when it comes to the Horn King, he is another one of those villains whom, honestly, I don't really see him swearing up. Even if he would go and lose his temper, I don't really see him go and actually dropping the F-bomb. Not even if he is similar to Maleficent in the way where he is that classic type of villain where his swears would most likely be the kind where he would just go and insult his minions and calling them fools whenever things go wrong for him. So by that point, honestly, I feel like he is a lot less likely to go and swear because, similarly to Shere Khan, he knows that he has this presence and that he has everything else that can go and present his evil vibes. Like, he knows that he is wicked. He knows he is feared by everyone. He doesn't need to go and swear. Just his presence alone strikes fear upon everyone. So why would he need to go and actually swear in the first place? Especially when he has his plan to go and bring back the Cauldron-born army to go and do his bidding. So in that regards, I think honestly, he would go right over here where he would refuse to say it because he's just one of those villains that doesn't have to go and actually say it because he knows that he is the Horn King. He has everything else to go and describe his evilness. He doesn't need swear words to go and say how evil he is. Oh, and speaking of villains that I love, we got Ratigan from The Great Mouse Detective. And you can tell that I am a big fan of Ratigan, considering that I do have a production cell of him that I have next to my desk. But back to Ratigan, the thing with him is that, yeah, he would definitely be the kind who would go and swear, considering that he can have a short temper where once the fuse is lit, then that's when he would go and massively explode, and he would really explode big, especially if you accidentally call him a rat. However, I would say that at the same time, even though he can have that short fuse, he can also collect himself. He can be very cool. He can be very calm. And whenever he is in his regular personality where he is not angry, he's a lot more theatrical than he is someone who would go and regularly swear, similarly to Cruella de Vil. So in that regards, it's more like a bit of a 50-50 chance. Maybe there is a chance where he would go and actually explode in rage and swear up a storm, or he would be a lot more collected and doesn't need to go and swear. Basically, what I'm saying is that he doesn't necessarily have the general personality to go and be the kind who would regularly say the F word, but he definitely would whenever he is not happy. So that's why with Ratigan, I think honestly, I'll just put him like high on the list, but not at the top, where he has sworn off to go and say the F word, but has definitely said it at some point.
Oh, this is wicked. So delightfully wicked.
All right, the next one that we have here is Sykes from Oliver and Company. And I'm just going to go and say right now that I know one scene in particular where he would go and say the F word. Okay, but for real though, when it comes to Sykes, he is the closest character that Disney has ever made to having Donald Trump in a Disney animated feature, where he is presented as this very crooked businessman from New York that has no morals, no empathy, and no heart whatsoever. All he cares about is getting money, and that's it, regardless of how he gets it or what he has to do in order to get it, regardless of the laws whatsoever. And with that kind of personality, absolutely, he would be the kind that would regularly swear up a storm, mainly because he just doesn't care. Like, he knows that he could be nasty. He knows that he could be mean. So if he would go and swear, then who gives a crap? In that regards, he's going to be right up here on the top of the list, where he would definitely regularly say the F word, because that's just the kind of businessman that he is. He doesn't care about the law. He doesn't care about any morals or principles or whatsoever. And he doesn't care if you get offended if he would say the F word right in front of you. All right, now it's time for some fun, where we are about to get into the Disney Renaissance villains, starting with Ursula from The Little Mermaid. And honestly, when it comes to Ursula's personality, as great of a villain that she is, it's hard to really know if she would be the kind who would go and regularly say the F word. But then again, with her diva-like personality, it would not be impossible to imagine if she would actually go and say it, especially when she is the kind where she would lose her temper, or that she couldn't get a grasp of her emotions. So at that point, I think with Ursula, she's not going to go and regularly say the F word, because she's very similar to Honest John or the Coachman, where she would have to go and wear a mask in order to go and get people into her con game. Like when she would go and try to get Ariel to sign the deal and to get her voice, then of course she wouldn't be in that kind of attitude where she would go and be nasty and she would regularly swear and all that kind of stuff. Like, she would have to go and pretend to be nice to Ariel in order to make things go her way, or whichever mermaid would go and cross her path and try to make like some crooked deal or whatever. But I feel like there might be some times where definitely Ursula would go and swear. So in that regards, I think I'm going to put Ursula high on the list, but not too high, where she has definitely said it at some point, but she wouldn't go and say it regularly.
That was a close one. Too close.
All right, now the next one we have here is another underrated villain that I really enjoy, Percival C. McLeach from The Rescuers Down Under. And some could say that maybe he is the kind that might be similar to Madame Medusa, where he's just the kind of person who really wouldn't care that much. But honestly, I feel like he would be more closer to Sykes than someone like Madame Medusa or Cruella de Vil, where, yeah, he would definitely swear regularly, but it wouldn't be because of having like a short temper or anything like that. He's just someone who doesn't care. Like, this is just someone who only cares about making money, regardless of morals or ethics or anything like that. I mean, he does have his fair share of getting angry, especially when hanging out with Joanna, and that Joanna would not necessarily do his biddings well, or that Joanna would go and keep stealing eggs. But still, I feel like he would be the kind that regardless if he is angry or if he is happy or anything like that, he would go and drop the F-bomb regularly. I think he would go and be the kind that, yeah, he would be on the top of the list where he would swear a whole bunch, but it would just be for whatever reason. Like, the reason why he would say the F word doesn't really matter. It's just that he would go and occasionally say it regardless.
I didn't make it all the way through 3rd grade for nothing.
Now, the next one we have here is the personification of toxic masculinity, Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. And the thing with Gaston is that, honestly, considering that he's all about those traits of toxic masculinity, you would probably expect that, yeah, he would be the kind that would swear and curse and not really care what other people think about him. And while some of that is true, I think he is a little too prideful. Like, he's the kind where he doesn't necessarily feel like he has to swear a whole bunch, because he knows that he is the greatest and doesn't really care if there are other people who would think less of him, unless they are an obstacle that gets in his way from getting what he wants or to make everything go his way, such as Belle refusing to go and marry Gaston. So in those cases, maybe he would go and swear, but I feel like with Gaston, it might not necessarily be as likely, considering that he wants to go and maintain that image that he is the greatest man in that village and that everybody respects him and that everybody loves him. He wants to go and maintain that persona. So at that point, maybe swearing is not necessarily as useful or as necessary for him as the other characters. But this is not to say that it's impossible for him to swear. So that's why I think with Gaston, I'm going to go and put him in the middle, where he hasn't said it before, but he can so if desired.
You're not with us, you're against us. Bring the old man.
Now, the next one we have here is Jafar from Aladdin. And at first glance, I was thinking that maybe he is more of the classic type of villain where he doesn't necessarily have the personality who would go and commonly say the F word or go and commonly swear, considering that he is one of those like calm and collected type of villains that he is secretly plotting in his own mind to go and make things go according to his plan in order to go and unleash his villainy. But the thing is with Jafar is that there is an instance where things actually do go his way and that he is able to achieve his evil plans, where he managed to get the lamp, he managed to have the genie be his servant. And at that point, that's when he really lets himself go and he really goes crazy. And at that point, when Jafar is all powerful, he is way more likely to go and drop some F-bombs, more so than he was before when he was just the advisor to the Sultan, or that he is serving the Sultan at that point. So honestly, when it comes to Jafar, I'm not going to go and put him high on the list, and I'm not going to go and say that he would refuse to go and say it. So I believe Jafar is another villain where I'm going to go and put him in the middle. I don't think he said the F word before he became all powerful, but I think he does describe as someone who can say the F word if desired. And that is when he does become powerful. And when he unleashes his madness, then at that point, yes, he would definitely go and say it.
If you won't bow before a sultan, then you will cower before a sorcerer!
Now, the next villain that we have here is Scar from The Lion King. And when it comes to Scar, I feel like he's very similar to Ratigan, except he doesn't let out his anger as much as Ratigan. He doesn't necessarily have a short fuse. He has a lot more of that theatrical style of personality, in which doesn't seem likely where he would go and drop the F-bomb or regularly swear. He is constantly in that Jafar-like attitude where he is cool, calm, and collected, and that he is able to go and execute his plans very well without unleashing his anger or without going crazy. And even when things do go his way, when he does become the king of the Pride Lands, he doesn't become like maniacal. He doesn't become mad. He still maintains that same cool and theatrical attitude that he has. So honestly, I feel like Scar is a lot less likely to go and swear compared to the other Disney villains. So that's why I'm going to go and put him right over here, where I just don't really see him as the kind to go and actually say the F word, where he hasn't said it, and I think he would refuse to go and say it. If anything, I think he would go and let his hyenas to say all the foul language he would want to go and say. So it's a little bit similar to Lady Tremaine in that sense.
Precisely.
Now, the next villain we're about to look into is Governor Radcliffe from Pocahontas. And when it comes to Governor Radcliffe, honestly, I'm not 100% sure if he would be the kind to go and actually swear. Not because of his personality necessarily, but more because of the historical setting. Since we are talking about a movie that is set in 1607. So by that logic, there's a part of me that tries to figure out, would people say the F word in 1607? So in that regard, I don't know if the F word was actually invented during that time. And even if it is, would Governor Radcliffe be the kind who would want to do so? Because his biggest goal is to go to the Americas in order to go and find gold. That's all he wants to go and get. And especially, the thing is with Governor Radcliffe is that he is a governor and he takes that title extremely seriously. He wants to go and present to everyone, rather it be to his people or to the natives, that he is a respected leader. So in that regards, I feel like even if he would during that time, I don't know if he would be the kind who would go and actually say it. So I think for the sake of maintaining his governor image, I don't think he would go and say the F word. So I'm going to put him over here where he would refuse to go and say it so that he could be more respected as a governor.
My rivals back home, it's not that I'm bitter, but think how they squirm when they see how I glitter.
Now, here is another favorite villain of mine, and that is Judge Claude Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And when it comes to Frollo, I think the answer is actually very clear on where he is on the tier list. And considering that he is a man of the church, that he takes his religion very seriously, it's for sure he would not go and say the F word or any swear words whatsoever. He would be the kind of person who would believe that saying the F word is sinful. So at that point, it's a very easy guess to where he would be. He would absolutely refuse to say it, debatably more than any other villain in the Disney roster or even on this list. Maybe like on par with the Queen, where he kind of sets his own rules to just not swear whatsoever, because in his case, he knows that it would go and upset God.
So typical of your kind to twist the truth, to cloud the mind with unholy thoughts.
And speaking of favorites, I know that this is a favorite for many. It's Hades from Hercules. And when it comes to Hades, considering his fast-talking, salesman-like personality, he would be the kind that maybe there are a few instances where he would go and sneak in some swear words. And yeah, honestly, like when he is cool, when he's calm, when he's fine, I can imagine that maybe he would go and slip in some swear words, but not necessarily dropping an F-bomb altogether. Like, he'll probably go with some of the tamer swears like damn and crap and stuff like that. But then when he does unleash his anger, when he does become furious and his fire becomes red, then that's the point where he would go and explode with rage. He is very similar to Ratigan in that kind of sense, where he does have a short fuse, and even though it doesn't ignite all the time, when it does, it's at that point where you have to watch out, because that's when he becomes dangerous, and that's when he lets out the worst swear words, including the F-bomb. So at that point, considering that he's very much like Ratigan, I would say he would go, not necessarily at the top, but he would go over here where he would say it at some point. I don't think he would go and regularly say it. And I know maybe some people might debate that maybe he would be the kind who would go and regularly say the F word, but I feel like, honestly, like when he collects himself more, when he's a lot more calm, then at that point, he wouldn't do it as much. It's just definitely likely, but not all the time.
What? Okay, fine, I'm cool, I'm fine.
Now, the next one that we have is Shan Yu from Mulan. And I do agree, Mulan is a great movie, but Shan Yu is definitely one of the weaker aspects. And that's because Shan Yu is not necessarily strong as a villain. And when I say strong, we don't really get much of a personality from him. All we see is that he's just menacing, and that's really it. Maybe there are a few times where he does talk, but he's the kind who tries to show his presence and his massive army of Huns that he is intimidating. But still, though, when it comes to his personality, when it comes to him as a villain, we don't necessarily get all that much, which is why it's kind of hard to really tell if Shan Yu would be the kind to go and actually drop the F-bomb. So honestly, I think I'm going to go into the safe bet here, and I'm just going to put him in the middle where maybe he would go and say it. Like maybe he does have that personality where he would drop the F-bomb, especially when he would be with his Huns and stuff like that. But I don't know if he really would be the kind to go and actually say it. I don't know. It's just, Shan Yu doesn't show his true personality, or we don't see Shan Yu enough to really determine if he is the kind to actually go and drop the F-bomb or not. Now, the next one that we have here is gonna be Clayton from Tarzan. And he does share a lot of similar traits to Gaston, where he's a lot more prideful and that he embraces a lot of those traits that are associated with toxic masculinity. So he's not necessarily the kind of guy who would always go and actually say the F word all the time, but there are definitely some instances where you can imagine where he would actually go and say it, especially when he has to deal with Jane and her father, who are a lot more into like preserving nature and stuff. But then you have Clayton, who just cares more about shooting animals and getting trophies and stuff like that. So I can imagine maybe there are some instances where he would go and actually say it, but it's not really as much. So that's why with Clayton, I'm going to put him in a similar spot to Gaston, where he's in the middle, where honestly, he is best described as someone who wouldn't regularly go and swear in general, but he definitely can drop the F-bomb if he wants to.
Dear man.
All right, now when it comes to our next villains that we have here, we actually got some mute ones, so they're going to be easy to go and place. Like first up, we got the Firebird from Fantasia 2000, since the Firebird is considered the Chernobog of the sequel. And just like with Chernobog, it's more the factor that he's in Fantasia 2000, or that he's in a Fantasia movie. It's not necessarily the bird's fault that he cannot speak. It's just the fact that it's the rules of Fantasia, where in the animated segments, they cannot talk. The only sound you will hear is the classical music. So definitely the Firebird legally cannot say the F word. But we do have a similar but different case with the Carnotauruses from Dinosaur. And I know that there are some people out there who would go and argue that maybe Kron might be a villain, considering that he does have a pretty bad attitude, but he's not necessarily the main antagonist per se. And with his intentions, it's not necessarily anything bad, or that he wants to screw over all the dinosaurs for himself. I feel like in this case, it's pretty clear that if there is an actual villain, it's the Carnotaurus, or the pair of Carnotauruses that we have in that movie. And in Dinosaur, they kind of have a similar rule to The Land Before Time, where the carnivores are a lot more beast-like and they don't actually talk, where the herbivores, on the other hand, they are the ones who have the bigger brains, so they are able to go and actually speak. So that's why with the Carnotauruses, I'm also putting them in the bottom of the list, where they legally cannot say the F word. However, I cannot say the same about the next ones we have here, and that is definitely the case with another favorite villain of mine, Yzma from The Emperor's New Groove. And when it comes to Yzma, I feel like she's not the kind who would regularly go and say the F word, despite the fact that she is a villain who would embrace her own evilness and love her own villainy. But she is stuck in situations where she would go and say the F word, or she would be pushed to actually say the F word, especially when it comes to taking orders from Kuzco, or especially dealing with Kronk's stupidity. There are just so many circumstances where she definitely would have a chance to actually say the F word. And that's why with Yzma, I feel like she would technically be the kind where she would be in the middle, where she hasn't said it, but she can so if she wants. But considering the situations that she would get herself with both Kuzco and Kronk, I feel like it becomes a lot more likely. And I'm sure that there are certain points where she would go and actually say it. So that's why with Yzma, I'm putting her right up here, where she has sworn off saying the F word, but has definitely said it at some point.
It's called a cruel irony, like my dependence on you.
Now, the next one we got here is Commander Rourke from Atlantis: The Lost Empire. And with Commander Rourke, it's kind of easy to go and guess what kind of person that he is, and if he would go and actually swear or even say the F word. And honestly, I feel like he definitely would. I mean, we are talking about this military guy who values money and profits over the well-being of others. And in that case, he doesn't care what other people would think of him, especially if he would actually go and swear. So in that case, I feel like Commander Rourke is the kind of guy who would swear no matter what. If he's happy, if he's sad, if he's angry, no matter what the situation is, he would definitely be the kind who would just swear all around. In fact, I think amongst the entire team who went down to Atlantis, I think Commander Rourke is the one who would most likely go and swear. So that's why I'm putting Commander Rourke at the top of the list here, where he would regularly say the F word.
I know I'm forgetting something. I got the cargo, the crystal crew. Oh, yeah.
And now moving on to another military-like guy, or I guess technically he would, especially with his attitude. It is Captain Gontu from Lilo and Stitch. And I think with Captain Gontu, he's the kind who is a lot more short-fused, especially when it comes to dealing with Stitch. He is always angry. He is always ruthless. He always has to put up this tough personality. Like, he wants to prove that he is the guy who can go and get things done no matter what it takes, even if it means to get Stitch out of Earth so that he could be put in the intergalactic prison. So in that regards, I feel like with Captain Gontu, yeah, he would definitely be the kind who would regularly go and swear. So I would definitely put him very high on the list, where he would regularly say the F word.
You're vile, you're foul, you're flawed!
Now, the next movie that we're about to look into is going to be Treasure Planet. And we have two villains that we're going to be looking into, which is John Silver and Scroop. Now, the reason why I put both of them here is mainly because, honestly, I always felt that Scroop is like the straightforward main villain in Treasure Planet, especially with the fact that he's the one that would be taking the most initiative to do the evil actions, including killing off Mr. Arrow. But when it comes to John Silver, though, I know a lot of people would go and argue and say that he is technically the main villain of Treasure Planet, but honestly, I feel like it is very debatable, considering that with John Silver, or at least this version of John Silver, he is a lot more of a father figure than a villain, debatably more so than most other adaptations of Treasure Island, where whenever we see John Silver, he's a lot more kind and we see a lot more of his heart, more so than we actually do see his villainy. That's why, for me personally, I feel like it's very debatable if we would go and call John Silver as a villain, considering that he feels a lot more like a heartfelt father figure to Jim Hawkins. But still, though, after considering, after like talking and debating about this, I figured, why the fridge not? Let's go and actually put in both here. And one thing, I'll just go and have this out of the way, with Scroop being the most villainous in the entire movie, and considering that he's kind of like this heartless pirate, he would definitely be at the top of the list. Honestly, like, he would definitely be the kind who would go and regularly say the F word here. But when it comes to John Silver, on the other hand, considering that he also has to go and take on the responsibility of being the father that Jim Hawkins never had, I think for him it's less likely that he would go and swear. He wouldn't go and regularly say the F word in front of Jim. He would want to be more encouraging and, be more caring to Jim Hawkins than to actually go and keep saying the F word. Now, not to say that he wouldn't go and actually swear, because I'm sure when he's with his pirate crew, he would definitely be like nasty and swear up a storm and stuff like that. But I feel like amongst the evil pirates in Treasure Planet, I feel like John Silver would be the less likely to go and regularly swear. So that's why I'm just putting him under Scroop, and I'm just going to say that he has said it at some point. Not saying that he would go and regularly swear, but it is definitely possible that he has.
Next thing you know, they'll be saying I've gone soft.
Now, at this point, we're going to go and skip ahead. We're not going to look into Brother Bear, considering that there is no legitimate villain here. And even with those who are considered antagonists, well, their intentions are not evil per se. You do understand where they're coming from with their sentiments, especially when they don't understand the full picture of the scenario. So we're going to skip Brother Bear, and we're going to move ahead to Home on the Range, as we are going to be looking into Alameda Slim. And even though I do think Alameda Slim is an absolutely dumb villain, I feel like with him, I feel like he is similar to someone like Ursula, or maybe even Ratigan, where he can be cool and calm when he needs to, especially to go and make his plans work in order to go and gain his own profit, especially from stealing all the cows from his yodeling. But there are times when he could definitely have a short fuse, and that he could lose his temper, and he might end up swearing up a storm, especially when we are talking about a character that is voiced by Randy Quaid. I'm sure there are some scenarios that you can imagine where he could swear up like crazy, similarly to the Queen of Hearts even. However, in this case, though, I'm just gonna say that with Alameda Slim, I don't think he's the kind that would always swear, but him swearing and saying the F word would definitely be a strong possibility. So that's why I'm going to put him next to John Silver, where I'm sure he has said it at some point, but he wouldn't go and regularly say the F word. All right, the next character that we have here, we actually got a fun one, and that is Bowler Hat Guy from Meet the Robinsons. And with Bowler Hat Guy, honestly, he is a true old school villain. And when I say old school, I don't necessarily mean like a classic villain like Maleficent or the Horned King. I mean like those Saturday morning cartoons old school villains like Snidely Whiplash or Dick Dastardly. Like that kind of villain, especially when his looks are very similar to them, like even with the twirling mustache, like he has that strong vibe. But anyways, going back to to Bowler Hat Guy. I know some people might say, well, technically the real villain is actually the Bowler Hat itself. However, if we are going to be talking about the actual villain in all this, it is technically, or like if we are talking about the villain throughout the picture, it is technically Bowler Hat Guy. And considering that he is that old school villain, honestly, it's hard to really imagine if he would actually go and swear or actually have that personality in him where he would actually drop the F-bomb. Even when he has those situations where things do go wrong and it doesn't necessarily work out, I think honestly, he would go and have like the more tamer swear words to go and say. Like, he's the kind that I feel like he's more likely to say drat or dang it, more so than actually dropping the F-bomb or saying other major swear words. So at that point, I don't know if he would want to go and actually say it, because it's not really part of his personality, especially with the fact that there is that inner child in him where he can be pretty immature, but not like Prince John immature, just the kind where he never really let go of that inner kid in him. I just feel like it's far less likely for Bowler Hat Guy to actually go and swear. So in that regards, I think he's gonna go over here where he would refuse to say it because it's not really his personality, and he would go with the Saturday morning cartoon swears more so than actually saying something like the F word. All right, now this one I will say is going to be a little bit tricky to try to figure out, but I know that this is a fan favorite. It's Dr. Facilier from The Princess and the Frog. And with Dr. Facilier, honestly, when thinking about his personality, sure, he does have that con man mentality similar to Honest John or maybe even Sykes, but I don't know if he would be the kind who would go and really swear. Even if he would show there are times when he can get angry or when there are times when things don't necessarily go his way, I don't know if his personality would go and really let him go and actually swear. I mean, it's not like Bowler Hat Guy where he doesn't necessarily have that personality where you could tell that, oh, he wouldn't go and actually say it. I feel like maybe he would, but I don't really know if he would be the kind who would actually swear up a storm, or if he would even swear in general. So I think honestly with Dr. Facilier, I'm gonna go and put him in the middle, where honestly, maybe he could. If he wants to swear, he definitely can do so, but I just don't know with the kind of personality that he has, especially with that New Orleans flair. I don't know if he would be the kind to go and actually say the F word.
Don't you disrespect me, little man.
All right, so now that we are getting into the modern age, I'm going to say that with the next Disney villains that we have here, considering that a good chunk of them consist of plot twist villains, you are going to hear a very similar theme of characters who are very two-faced, or that they're putting on one persona in front of everybody, but then when you do see their evil side, they are completely different. And let's go and start things off with Mother Gothel from Tangled. Even though she's not necessarily a plot twist villain, she definitely is two-faced, where there are two sides of her that she would go and present. Where when she is with Rapunzel, she needs to go and act like the mother of Rapunzel, that she wants to do everything she can in order to keep her in the tower and to make sure that her powers are exclusively hers, or that the powers of the Sundrop flower is just hers so that she could go and stay forever young. But then at the same time, she does have that wicked evil side where there are a few times where she can go and actually show it. And yeah, you could tell that when she is evil, there is that side of her where you could tell that she does regularly drop the F-bomb, or she would regularly be the kind who would go and just really swear up, especially to go and express her anger. And maybe there can be a few times that she would go and show that even to Rapunzel, especially when she would suggest the idea of maybe getting out of the tower for whatever reasons, even if it means to go and check out the lanterns. So in that regards, I feel like with Mother Gothel, she wouldn't necessarily be at the top of the list, but I can imagine she would go and actually say it at some point. So I feel like she would be a good fit right over here.
Great. Now I'm the bad guy.
All right, now it's the time that we're about to get into the plot twist villains, starting with King Candy from Wreck-It Ralph. And with King Candy, he's probably the most obvious that he has two sides of him, where there's the King Candy side and then there is the Turbo side. And when he is King Candy, he is very bubbly. He is very goofy. He's pretty much unleashing his inner Ed Wynn, where he would go and present himself as the goofy, silly king of all candy and stuff like that, trying to maintain that image so that no one would be suspicious of who he would truly be. But then when he does show his Turbo side, that's when you do see that he's actually a very bitter and jealous individual, where all he wants is to pretty much live forever and be considered like the king of video game racing. So at that point with Turbo, I don't know if I would really say if he would be the kind that he would really go and swear. I think it's like you would really have to push him in order to really let out the F word. So honestly, it's hard to really imagine if he would go and truly say it at certain points. I think honestly with King Candy, he would be more in the middle where, yeah, like again, you would have to really push him. And I feel like it would be extremely rare if he would go and do so, but it wouldn't be impossible for him to say the F word. Rather, if he is King Candy or if he reveals himself as Turbo.
And I did not reprogram this world to let you and that Holocaust riddled warthog take it away from me!
Now, the next one that we got here is going to be Hans from Frozen. And what's very interesting about Hans is that even though he does have these two sides of him, they're really not that different from one another, considering that you got to keep in mind that he is from royalty, that even though that he has no chance to ever become a king, he is still one of the princes of the Southern Isles. So at that point, I feel like with Hans, he would be the kind where he would like restrict himself from saying the F word because he still has a bit of that image that he wants to go and maintain. And that is especially when he wants to go and execute his plot in order to go and get rid of the princesses, or technically the queen and the princess of Arendelle, so that he could truly become a king. But either way, I feel like with either side, like when he does show his evil side or when he shows his loving side, there's nothing that tells me that he would be the kind who would go and actually swear, because again, he is technically still of royalty and he still maintains those royal ethics. So honestly, I feel like with Hans, he would be the kind he would just refuse to do so, regardless if he's putting up an act or if he is truly revealing his evil side. I just don't really see him as someone who would go and really let out his swearing.
You won't get away with this.
Oh, I already have.
Now, the next one that we got here is Dr. Callahan, or Yokai from Big Hero 6. And honestly, I just gotta say that Big Hero 6 is definitely a fun and great movie, but it's very similar to Mulan, where one of the weakest assets is the villain. And even as a plot twist villain, I feel like Dr. Callahan is kind of like, I don't know. But anyways, that's just my opinion. Going back to Dr. Callahan, and if he would go and say the F word, originally I was thinking that maybe I would put him in a similar position to Shan Yu, where maybe he would do so, but I didn't necessarily have a true grasp of his personality. But then again, he does have that backstory with what happened to his daughter. And I feel like in that instance, that could probably explain a little bit more, that he'll have those possibilities or those opportunities where maybe he'll say it out of like trauma and out of like what happened during that time. I feel like he would definitely be more likely to say it than Shan Yu. So in that case, I'm going to go and put him over here where because of what happened to his daughter, he definitely has said it at some point, but would I say he would be the kind of personality that would regularly say the F word? That honestly, I'm not 100% sure. All right, now the next one that we have here is going to be Bellwether from Zootopia. And yeah, it's definitely for sure that she would not be the kind who would go and always swear, considering that she does present a sweet personality whenever she would go and help others out, especially when helping out Mayor Lionheart or helping out Nick and Judy with whatever they may need. But then when you do see her evil side, and it turns out that she's the one that's giving the carnivores of Zootopia a bad name in order to put herbivores as a higher class than them, then in that case, honestly, maybe there are times where you could see that maybe she would go and actually swear, where she would have that nasty side. But honestly, I don't 100% know if she truly would, because there is still a bit of that sweet side where she wouldn't really go out of her way to really like let out some swear words. I feel like in that regards, we're gonna have to wait and see until Zootopia 2, and maybe at that point, like when we do see when she does show up, like that can be when we will determine that we'll have a better taste of her evil side, and that's when we'll know, oh yeah, maybe she would be the kind who would regularly say the F word or not. But in this case here, honestly, I think I'm going to go into the safe bet, and I'm just going to go and put her in the middle, where maybe she would when she's evil, but she wouldn't do so all the time. Like, that's just, like, I'm honestly putting her up here, like, and that's being generous. Like, honestly, like, maybe there could be a debate where she would refuse to go and say it, but honestly, it's not impossible for her to say it, so that's why I'm going to put her in the middle.
What are you going to do? Kill me?
Oh, no, of course not. He is.
All right, now the next one that we got here is Tamatoa from Moana. And I know that with Moana, there are several different villains technically, but really if there is one true straightforward villain here, it's gotta be Tamatoa. And in the case of Tamatoa, he is a lot more prideful than he is villainous or just nasty as a villain. Like, this is the kind of character who's a lot more like Gaston, where he just embraces who he is. Like, he is full of vanity and pride and just loves how shiny that he is and all the shiny objects that he has collected in his back, and that he is able to go and use that in order to go and eat up all the fish that he can. Like, he is living the good life, and he feels like he's living in luxury. So in that regards, I don't know if he would be the kind who would go and actually swear. Some would probably debate maybe he would, but in this case, it's like, I don't know, especially like even outside of his vanity and his pride, he doesn't seem like he has the personality to go and actually swear. I feel like he's a lot more witty than that, where his vocabulary is a lot more extensive than just regularly saying F words. I feel like this is going to be one of those where I feel like it's going to be debatable, where some people might put him a little bit higher or a little bit lower, but honestly, I just don't really see Tamatoa be the kind where he would go and swear. So honestly, I think I'm going to go and put him low, where I think he would go and refuse to say it, because I don't think he would be the kind who would use swear words in order to describe how beautiful and glamorous that he is.
I can't, I'm too shiny. Watch me dazzle like a diamond in the rough.
Okay, now with the next ones, we're going to be skipping ahead and we're not going to be looking into the sequels, since Ralph Breaks the Internet and Frozen 2 doesn't actually have a true villain. So we're going to get into Raya and the Last Dragon, and we're going to be looking into the Droon. And I know that some people might say, well, what about Namari? Wouldn't she be considered the villain of Raya and the Last Dragon? Honestly, not really. I feel like Namari is a lot more like a rival to Raya, more so than actually a villain. I feel like calling Namari a villain would be like calling Zuko the villain of Avatar: The Last Airbender. It doesn't necessarily seem that true, especially with what Namari later becomes during the film's climax. So, but with that said, though, it is pretty clear, it's very similar like with the argument with Dinosaur, with the Carnotaurus. It's very clear that the true villains are actually the Droon. And considering that the Droon, well, they're not necessarily like a personification or like a talking entity, they are just a plague. So in that regards, considering that they don't talk, well, it's pretty clear that they're going to be at the bottom where they legally cannot say the F word. Again, like with the Carnotauruses, if they can't talk, well then it's sure as hell that they won't say the F word. Okay, so now we're going to go and skip a couple of movies again, considering there are no villains or true villains in either Encanto or Strange World. So let's get into King Magnifico from Wish. And when it comes to King Magnifico, I think out of all the villains, he is the kind that he is the ruler that many of these villains wish that they could be. No pun intended. He is the kind who is very successful of being the leader of Rosas without much people questioning him prior to the events of the actual feature itself. And when it comes to King Magnifico, he really puts a lot of his points onto his charisma. Like, a big part of why he is so beloved in Rosas is because of his charming personality, that he presents himself as like a people person and really wanting to go and help people out and make Rosas a great place to go and live, and has the power to go and actually grant wishes. But is it possible for him to go and actually say the F word? Is it possible for him to go and actually swear? And in that regards, I would say yes, it definitely can. And that is especially the case when it's revealed that what he prioritizes the most is his power, is to stay at the top of the food chain of Rosas, is to maintain his authority. Like, it wasn't until Asha starts getting into his business and realizes that his authoritarian style ruling is actually pretty bad, that's when he begins to lose a little bit of his temper. And that's when you see that there is this side in him where he would definitely go and actually swear up a storm. But his charisma is able to go and really hide that well. And then once he does open up that book and he gains the dark magic, then that's when he gets a little bit more insane. That's when he's a little bit like Jafar, where he really does become mad with power. And that's when the evil side really gets out of him. And he shows that he truly can be someone who can be absolutely nasty, and that he would go and regularly swear up a storm. But the thing is that it's only at that moment where he really was starting to get tested, where that's when his villainy really gets unleashed. Like, once it starts to become more obvious that he prioritizes power over the well-being of others, that's when he becomes a little bit more villainous, and that's when he becomes more like someone who would go and actually say the F word. It's just that with King Magnifico, he's able to go and contain that a lot better than most of the others. And that's why, honestly, I'm going to go and put King Magnifico in the middle, where honestly, he has not said it before because he doesn't necessarily have to, especially with the charisma that he would go and present, but he definitely can whenever he is tested, regardless if it's from Asha or Star or from anyone in Rosas. But still, though, I think there are many villains who want to be like King Magnifico, where they are capable of just hiding that evilness so that they can maintain that power.
You are their handsomest, most beloved king.
You're right. I am a handsome king.
And then finally, we have our last villain to go and analyze, Nalo from Moana 2. And honestly, this is another one that I find to be very tricky because we don't really see much of Nalo's personality. I mean, sure, we do see a good chunk of Nalo when he is the big tornado that's guarding that island, preventing anyone else to be there so that all the communities can come together as one. But when it comes to his true personality, we only get like a small taste of it in the post-credit scene, and that's it. Like, we don't really know who Nalo really is. Like, honestly, doing this is kind of like judging Thanos based solely on his one little appearance in the first Avengers movie. Honestly, if we want to get a true grasp of who Nalo is, I feel like we would need a Moana 3 and that Nalo would be more prevalent in there. But until that time comes, honestly, I would say I honestly have no idea. So I'm just going to go and do the safe bet where I'm just going to go and put him in the middle. Maybe he would have that personality where he would go and actually swear up a storm. Again, no pun intended. But honestly, we haven't seen enough of him to truly determine if that really is the case.
No, we're just getting started.
And with that said, that should do it for this entire tier list of judging the Disney villains based on how more or less likely they could go and say the F word. And I just gotta say that looking at this entire list, it really does feel evenly spread out. There's something very satisfying to see that everything is just about the same, where even though there are some that have more than others, and maybe there are definitely more villains who are more likely to say the F word than there are those who don't. But still, though, just looking at this list, there's something very nice and satisfying that it's just like everything is so evenly spread out. And with that said, I just want to go and say thank you all so much for joining me on this. This was definitely a lot of fun to go through and to analyze each one. And if you guys all had a great time with this, then may I recommend to go and like this and come and subscribe to my channel. I mean, I make a lot of videos talking about animation and Disney. So if you enjoyed this, then I'm sure you'll have a great time with many of my other videos that I have. And also with that that said, oh, and also I just want to say, if you loved what I did here, then may I recommend to go and support me on my Patreon, in which you could go and get some amazing rewards, including but not limited to seeing my videos before anyone else, and as well as completely uncut. So with all that said and done, I would like to say thank you all so much for watching this, and until next time, see you later, dudes.
Well, she simply said that you're a fat, pompous, bad-tempered old tyrant.